I'm joined today by responsible design educator and design reparations co-founder Cecilia Scolaro. Today's episode challenges us to rethink design as an industry and how we approach problem solving in our modern world. We discuss her journey from conventional design thinking, where people are merely considered as users of products and services, to a more holistic approach that honours people's deepest values and the wisdom they already possess about their own needs. We explore how informal and community-driven markets have always existed, debunking the myth that there is no alternative to our current system. We'll also discuss the concept of sustainability through an Indigenous lens and discover how regenerative design focuses on creating the right conditions rather than imposing solutions. So let's dive into my conversation with Cecilia on decolonizing design and how we can transform our everyday decisions into catalysts for systemic change. Hey, Cecilia. So how are you doing today?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
I'm super excited to dig into all things responsible design and ethical business with you. We first met via Lily Graff's Imma Collective, which is community for impact-driven freelancers, and I was very lucky to then receive responsible design coaching with you. To kick us off, could you tell us a bit more about your personal journey towards unlearning mainstream design norms and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, that's a long journey. I guess everything started when I studied design years ago in Milan, but it really took a few turns. And for a while, I was not even recognizing myself too much into the design profession for a number of reasons, including this idea of the designer as this genius person that can solve every problem. But over the years, I made peace a bit with that identity and I started to take a critical look at it. I think that also reflects my own journey within commercial or startup industry. Since the beginning, it's clear that a lot of these businesses are meant to create mainly value for their owners. But you meet a lot of people in this organization that actually want to do good, and that give you hope that indeed in the system you can still make a difference. But yeah, 15 years later and a lot of companies, it became clear that the extractive nature of this system was not beatable by my own action alone. So that's where I decided to focus on responsible design, with the idea of also uniting a lot of the people that are working in organizations and want to make a difference, but also recognizing that the very nature of a lot of this organization is extractive. It is meant to extract value from work and from customers and bring that value to a few people. The bigger the company it is, the more this extraction process is really visible and it goes to people that are not even involved in the company itself.
Say other people, do you mean the investors who they have more power than the actual stakeholders such as customers and people who are affected?
Indeed, shareholders, investors, VCs. I mean, I think we don't look at it enough in a way how absurd it is that there are few people holding the power of this whole little theater effectively that is meant to extract value for them. Yeah, if you work in a big company, you don't even know who the owners are. But even in small or medium companies, sometimes you don't.
But I also find it interesting that that's the status quo, isn't it? It's like that's the norm, that companies are set up to be owned by people who actually have nothing to do with the end product, the end service. They're not experiencing the harms, but they're definitely getting their financial value from it.
Yes, what is really important to realize is that as people in this company or as designers, we effectively are putting our skills and knowledge and sweat to that service, and I think that, of course, it doesn't mean that there is no other thing that is obtained in the process, but that is the main goal. And design specifically is effectively creativity or art or problem solving to the service of capitalism.
You actually conceive of design as something much broader that many of us listening to this might think of design as. They might think it's just UX, or it's just the aesthetics of the screens. Can you maybe talk a bit more about design, how you define it, and why is it contributing to these challenges that we're collectively facing, both socially and environmentally?
Yes. So, I mean, there are as many design definitions as there are designers. That's, I think, part of the identity of designers as well. My attempt to define it is somehow also trying to dismantle some of the other definitions that are out there. For me, design is very much about applying a certain intention to something, and in a way, this word design has also been used to gatekeep a lot of creativity into a certain sphere and has erased thousands of history of human ingenuity into some kind of other, So design for me is really applicable to everything. And there is so much design that we don't recognize as design. And my own process into decolonizing this perception has brought me to discover so much more richness.
Yeah. And one of the topics we discussed when you were coaching me was that design is also about any choice that you make when you're in a position of authority, whether it's for your product or for your service, and how the end product impacts I was going to say the word user base then, because someone as an ex-Googler may say user base. But for me, what I find interesting about your term responsible design, it's not just about human-centric, user-centric, people-centric design, but it's about expanding our notion of impact, isn't it? Beyond humans, but also non-human beings and nature.
Indeed. For me, my own journey went through the realization of how limited was to talk about users in the first place. Like just considering people only in their capacity of interacting with a certain service.
And it's very passive, isn't it?
Yes. And it's also like not human centric. It's actually business centric, because at the end of the day, you are only looking at people if they interact with your business. Otherwise, they're not valuable enough. So that's already the first realization. Then when you start looking at the more complexity, you start also seeing how in the process we've been neglecting the communities, ecosystems, everything that we are actually immersed into in a process of over-reductionism, right? So we tend to really oversimplify very complex issues for the benefits of a certain business outcome. And in this way, we are extracting value. Yeah, that's the same mechanism. And as much as we are extracting from this process, we are extracting from ourselves. It's all the same mechanism, repeated and repeated and repeated. Responsible design is about getting awareness of this, acknowledging this process. And that's why I prefer responsible rather than other words, which is, by the way, just a choice. And there are many other ways to express this kind of work. But because it recognizes both the negatives, let's say, and the harm that is happening, but also try to take responsibility for something better.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because you have more and more professionals who are in extractive companies. I'm talking very much from my own point of view as well here. You have been working towards hitting specific goals, how to improve user engagement. And I always remember thinking, well, what about the outcomes? But we can't measure the outcomes. We just measure, the frequency of usage and how many installs. But when it comes to people who are awakening to the various crises that we face collectively, they're in a potentially extractive company. Perhaps they're there because they pay their mortgage. They maybe have children to look after. Is your thinking then that you can still make some change incrementally, or you should actually find ways to change your career path if you have the power to?
Well, first of all, I would like to have a really abundant perspective on this and accept there are like 1,000 possible answers to this question. All of them are valid depending on your context. There is something important that is being true to yourself, really. So I think that a lot of people experience forms of burnout or disillusion or really detachment from their own work because they recognize at some level a disconnect from what they thought they were doing, from what they thought was important and what the actual work is. And that especially true for designers that I feel enter a lot of the workforce with this idea of indeed
making the world a better place.
Indeed, representing the voice of the people and like making their life better. And effectively, as you were saying, their metrics are how much are they downloading these things, how much time they're frying their brain on this app, you know? That disconnect is something that affects a lot of people. So whether you are, once you see it, you need to decide for yourself how you're going to navigate that. It doesn't mean you can't bring any change, but it also needs to take in consideration your own well-being in the process. Yeah.
Perhaps if your personal circumstances where you can't easily leave, there are still some things you can do incrementally. One of your Medium articles called Start From Yourself, and I found it a very transformative way of thinking about change. It's this idea that even small things that you can do, whether it's the language that you use, so just talking about the word user, perhaps it's about challenging that notion that the metrics you're working on are about users, and actually just expanding that viewpoint and that idea of starting small and how that can sort of ripple out if you're not able to make huge transformative change easily.
For me, that whole notion is very much rooted in intersectional feminism, you know, and that is representing my own journey into facing my own privilege and biases and recognizing how they play a role in the way that I design as well. And this kind of constant work on myself at a certain point was disconnected from the job I was doing, and was very much a moment of bringing them together, to reconciling my identities. So part of that work, and there are brilliant scholars that talk about this much better than I do, but they emphasize, like Adrienne Murray Brown, the importance of the little things and how everything is connected. So everything is nested and connected in the outside world. And therefore, even the small action that you take can have a ripple effect that you can't even sometimes see. You know, you can't even predict or control.
And can't be measured potentially.
Exactly, but it's not less significant.
Yes.
So it really takes also some kind of humbleness, but in a way, it also takes away that pressure of impact. Impact is a very big
Especially
word.
with a capital I, like I'm here as an impact-driven professional. I'm going to drive impact. You were talking about that disconnect between like your authentic self and your career self. So for people who are feeling that disconnect, how can they stop that false separation?
Well, that is the most personal of journeys, right? So it's, I think it's gonna take different paths depending on your own self. And that's why one of the key things that I learned in this job is really trying to understand what's people's most important inner values and try to connect this work to that, because you're not gonna, work in this responsible or change kind of work without relying on some very strong inner foundation. If you're doing responsibility just for some kind of external validation of some kind or some kind of benefit of opportunistic motivation, the first obstacle you'll encounter is going to stop your efforts. And this is what you see is happening right now with the AI being stopped in so many companies, because it was never like a very deep felt.
It was surface level.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was for some kind of opportunistic value.
It gets to this idea of what I've been seeing, which is DEI and sustainability are heralded as we're doing better, but it's actually a form of PR.
Exactly. There is so much greenwashing. And the problem with that is that it created like disillusion as well among professionals, but also other people approaching this kind of work. So it has been doing a lot of damage. So even to the argument that maybe I myself was doing a few years ago, saying, yeah, everything is better than nothing. Yes. And at the same time, this created that false idea of progress.
Yeah.
And it was not actually ever real.
I think that also goes back to if a company is set up, whether it's got shareholders who are expecting, financial returns year on year, it doesn't have its own social environmental mission, it's almost expected then that it will not value those sorts of things. And so that's why I'm very interested in new types of business models which see profit as a means to an end rather than profit for the sake of it.
I think that those kind of different economies have always existed. And I think that what is nice to see now is that there is some kind of academic recognition of that.
Finally.
Finally.
By academic, do you mean like global North academia is finally waking up to it?
Exactly. Yeah. So like informal markets and like all sorts of community-driven markets, exchanges markets, but also just like cooperatives of some kind have existed across times, like value exchange that was not regulated by an extractive capitalist motivation has always existed. Yeah, it's always been part of a different
it's not a
way
new
of being.
concept.
Exactly. So, I mean, the last 100 years have convinced us that, capitalism has always been there, but it's a relatively new human invention.
Yeah, even the stock market itself.
Exactly. It's nothing in the big scheme of things. But this idea that there is no alternative is exactly the idea of scarcity that is needed for this system to flourish for its own benefit only. So these different kind of economies have always existed. It's very nice to see now that there is this whole post-growth movement and this kind of attention to it. But I really also hope that it doesn't get whitewashed, and that doesn't become another thing that, oh yeah, we invented it, that wouldn't be really honest.
Yeah, completely. And I think also this notion of deciding to become like an impact professional, or I'm going to work in sustainability, that has some sort of grandiosity to it, doesn't it? Of I'm going to now drive change. I've seen the problem. When actually, you mentioned the word decolonizing. What does it mean to decolonize across design and across business? Because I think that is a topic that many people have no concept or frame of reference about.
Yeah, I think I may use you mentioning sustainability. So, when you talk with like Indigenous people around the world, and that's what we are doing with design reparations, a lot of them, they don't know what sustainability means.
Yeah.
They're really like,
because it's just how they live.
Exactly. Is there any other option? I mean, can you poison your own food? Is this smart? And that's like, for me, decolonizing is also realizing that there are a lot of other views of the world that are often being discarded, erased, oppressed, and actually hold a lot of wisdom and that can guide us in facing a lot of the challenges that we face today with the crisis that we have. And specifically for design, it means recognizing that design was not this discipline born in Europe during the Industrial Revolution, but it is an activity that humans have been doing for thousands of years across culture, and that the gatekeeping is part of specific colonial project. And it also means that imposing a certain way of doing and thinking and designing that the design discipline has been definitely complicit in doing, is part of the same colonial project. So design and colonialism have been connected, and it just what it has been. It doesn't mean it needs to be the same going forward, but we do need to recognize that and heal that relationship before we can actually move into really co-creating futures.
Yeah, and when you talk about healing, that obviously implies harm has been done. And of course, some of your writing talks about how before we start thinking about I'm going to drive impact, it's actually first interrogating how is your work externalizing harm? And can we talk more about the importance of, first of all, reducing that harm before we seek to make that positive change?
Yes, the example that I think is more fitting is talking about the carbon credits, because the carbon credits for me are the best example that if you do not go deep enough in understanding the harm that you've been doing, whatever sustainable solution you're going to come up with is going to replicate exactly the same mechanisms. Carbon credits are this financial product that was born with the idea of financing the capturing of CO2 in the atmosphere, and essentially planting trees around the world. I mean,
monoplantations.
Exactly, but the problem is which trees and what it became such a big market that first of all, a lot of it turned out to be fake. And second of all, the one part that was not fake was actually harming people and environments around the world. So if you do not analyze your harm really well, and you don't acknowledge the past and even not just the past, but the present, the current systems of oppression and extraction that are currently working on that specific place, you're going to replicate exactly the same. So it's not like just a temporary thing, like before you take care of the harm and then you look at the impact, but it's a continuously circular process for everything you do. You need to acknowledge, am I doing any harm? And the answer is going to be yes. Most of the time.
Possible to not cause harm in modern society.
Exactly, because we are part of very extractive systems and you can't fix it. And the idea of fixing it is the most colonial and white idea again, can just try to heal what you can heal and create space to redistribute power, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about.
Yeah. And what I found quite frustrating, I was trying to find ways to weave in some form of digital sustainability agenda in my previous role. And it was seen as not something relevant or not timely. It was maybe something for next year. So I find that very tricky to navigate. And that's why with the cognitive dissonance of you see there's a problem, but actually sometimes within the system, there is no real way of solving it, and it's about building new alternatives.
Yes, that is absolutely the case. And at the same time, I believe that depth of work can happen in each one of us, right? So, and that's where I see the small action that can make a difference. So, for example, you can decide to make your own service fully accessible. You don't need anybody's permission. You don't need any strategy on accessibility.
You don't need to wait for legal regulations telling you must.
No, you don't need a company strategy to do so. You can make your digital service using less energy. You can make your product using sustainable materials. It doesn't even need to be declared. It can be the way that you do your job. And I think that is often evaluated. How much power there is in the small decisions. They don't need any recognition. But that's what I was saying before. If you wait for external validation, it's a doomed process. You just need to do it because it's what you want to do, because what is important for you, what makes your skills usage worth it.
Yeah, and I also think people more broadly in tech and across business, perhaps they feel powerless in the face of very big, very complex challenges, even though many people are already experiencing the harms of those crises. It's only now that people in the global north are saying, this is now impacting me potentially. But how do we then move from deciding, okay, this is a huge challenge, but I can take action? What I'm trying to highlight is there's people who feel powerless, but actually they're in positions of extreme power without realizing it. They have the privilege of having some autonomy within their role.
Yeah, so I run several education initiatives. That's actually the core of my work these days. And I can tell you that the most common feedback I hear at the end of my courses is, I worked in this course thinking that I was completely powerless, and I walk out of this course realizing how many decisions I can take differently on a daily basis. And I think people really need to realize that. And I don't want to underplay the power that certain structures are going to have on people, and it's not always going to be possible. It's not going to be perfect, and we shouldn't oversimplify that mechanism either. But I also think that there is a lot of indifference, both in our life as citizens and as designers in companies, similarly in saying, oh yeah, that's just the way things are. Yeah.
And we know that social norms are very powerful at dictating what people do and don't do. It's almost like your responsibility, isn't it, to actually start to get out of your comfort zone a bit and question norms and finding other like-minded people to come along with you, rather than feeling like this cog in a much bigger wheel.
Yes, that's a very important point you're making. You do need community. You do need other people. Also, just really not to feel like you're going crazy. It's sometimes just to validate also your own journey. And, there are so many authors out there, but also communities and people in your own organization that are feeling the same. So I feel like sometimes we just need the right vocabulary, right, to talk about it.
Yeah, to reach out to the right people.
Exactly. And to start naming and pointing at things and being able to say how absurd certain ways things are. And that's the starting point, and the thing is, once you see, you cannot see anymore, and that's I think a little bit of my personal journey as well. It's a blessing and a curse, I say sometimes, in the sense I feel like I'm exactly in the right place, that I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And at the same time, I know that I can't go back to do other things anymore because of my
because it would be
well-being.
It also goes back to your point that you recognized your authentic self wouldn't allow that to happen.
Exactly. And I also want to attach another thought to that. Like, there is this idea, especially in the design and the tech industry, of neutrality, that the designer is someone, or the innovator, the tech developer are somehow separate and neutral in relation to what they're building. But that's not true. Everything that we do, there is a part of us. And I think that just starting by recognizing that and kind of rejecting this idea of objectivity, of universality, it's a really important step, because in one way it shows us the power that we have, and on the other side it shows also the limitations that we have, and how we do need a very heterogeneous and diverse group of people to work on something in order to be, building something that is reaching more people. But that existence of you in your product can never be neutral.
Yeah, and one really obvious way that manifests is when you take a very ableist approach to how you're building your app or how you're running a particular service, and then it's only when regulations come in around digital accessibility and so on that you're actually forced to confront you did have that bias.
Yes, but that's why everything starts from yourself, because it starts from recognizing your own privilege, right? And recognizing that you cannot actually experience other people's lives. There is no amount of empathy that will allow you to put actual emphasis on different lived experiences. And that is something I think very crucial in the critique of design and UX and innovation, that everything starts with this idea of understanding the customers and then essentially extracting insights out of people, right? Going back to whatever room and come up with a solution in order to sell a product to them again,
Yeah.
So you are effectively kind of extracting their knowledge and using it almost against them. I mean, in some cases for them.
Depending on the goal, yeah. If the goal is to just get them to subscribe or get them to purchase when it might not actually be in their best interest, then yeah, I totally see that.
Yeah. So we do need to recognize that. And that's part of decolonizing design, is also recognizing that people know exactly what they need. They don't need a designer to tell them that, or a technologist to come up with a solution for them. And the designer and the technologist, the innovator, should take a humble step back and find ways where they can substitute the conditions for these people to auto and self-determine what they want.
What I love about what you just said is so clear to me, because I often speak to various founders who know what the solution is and they're going to launch it. And what you're saying is, let's spend more time figuring out what are the actual needs of the people that you're building for, and how can you authentically use user research to build something that meets their needs, rather than take that knowledge and then just try and use it to grow revenue for the sake of it.
Well, I mean, there is plenty of very good resources out there around co-design. And that's, I think, the place where I would start, by redistributing that power back to those people. But not just the power to decide, but also the power to benefit from whatever solution that you are building. And one of the key points of regenerative design is getting away from solutions and focusing on the conditions. So start looking at things as if it was a garden, In a garden, you don't build plants, you put seeds,
and you see what happens after the fact. Yeah, you can't control the end result.
Exactly. But you do work on the conditions. So you water the seeds, you create, you cover maybe the plant. So you work on everything that's around to make sure that the plant by itself can grow and can thrive and can find their own directions. It's fundamentally different, but we do live in a very mechanical mindset that tell us that we can control the future. We can design and put together all the pieces so that A plus B plus C plus D actually brings this result. But if you have worked for more than a few years, you realize how all of that is just theoretical. I mean, that is the number one frustration I've heard from all startuppers. Like, I did everything right. I followed all the rules and the guidelines, and I follow every step from whatever big startup did, and it still didn't work. Because the whole idea that you can control the journey that way is ludicrous, is actually harming people in the process and planet as well.
Wow. So what's interesting is that you're seeing these issues and then you're trying to do something about it. And that's probably a good way to move on to discussing what design reparations is. Like, is there an element of co-design there? And how does the whole program work and actually bring two different groups of people together, really?
So, well, design reparations started around 1 year ago when I met Tiago. I was already in this journey of responsibility that inevitably brought me to look into the colonial systems, and then looking at decolonization. Tiago has a background as a designer, but has been working for years in collaboration with Indigenous people around the world on several different projects. And so it started with just let's have a nice workshop for designers. I think it would be very interesting for them to hear more of these worldviews. And then it kind of evolved, and we started talking with representatives of different Indigenous and traditional people around the world and asking their opinions and trying to co-design as much as possible and finding ways to also transfer the power, shift the power balance again. So we decided to focus everything on reciprocity and this idea that designers have an opportunity to learn from Indigenous and traditional people, and at the same time have an opportunity to lend their skills and their labor towards supporting the initiatives that a lot of these people are running towards their own preservation, towards the preservation of their ecosystem, towards facing the challenges of climate change. We started with participating to design weeks. So we're going to go to Nairobi Design Week in less than a month. And we're going to bring one elder from the Samia people that live on Lake Victoria in Kenya directly in the Nairobi Design Week and trying to establish conversations with the designers that are there. And this is for us a really practical way to bring decolonization into practice instead of just being like this almost academic word that a lot of people are talking about. This is just one way, by the way, there are many, of trying to, also design decolonization, not just decolonizing design, but for me, design has this power of bringing an idea into practice, translating something into a physical manifestation of some kind.
Yeah.
For me, that's design reparation is a way to explore that. Yeah, so we are trying to create more and more opportunities online and offline for that exchange to happen, essentially.
That's incredible. Many professionals actually lack any understanding of Indigenous knowledge, even though various worldviews are thousands of years old and are more valid than some of the science and very empirical colonial ways that we've all been taught throughout our lives and our educational systems.
Yes.
So if you are seeing you have that gap and you want to better understand, but you also don't want to just come in and extract, because you don't want to perpetuate that extractive mindset. Beyond joining design reparations, how else do you think people who lack that knowledge, how can they respectfully learn?
Yes, so I think, first of all, again, there is a lot of literature and some other ways of this knowledge being passed on, and it's a lot about the lens on how you're going to look at that knowledge. If you're just looking at it from like, oh, that's nice folklore, or you're looking at it, this is actual wisdom, and that's
yes, wisdom to be translated into action.
Exactly. Consider that Indigenous people around the world are around 6% of the global population, but they look after around 80% of global biodiversity. So there is so much to be learned there. At the same time, they are very active already in trying to bring this knowledge, these worldviews, onto the rest of the world. And for that, they are often oppressed, criminalized even in some places. So find out about what is happening in your own country and about what the Indigenous people of your own country are already active on. And I know that in the global north, especially in Europe, it's sometimes a very tricky thing to talk about, our ancestors. But in our own journey in looking at this knowledge, we realize there is a lot that we lost from our own culture.
Yeah, it's actually grief for the knowledge that we could have had, but due to various practices centuries ago, we've lost it.
Yes, but even you need to go maybe 3-4 generations ago, our people were able to manage the land, to do a lot of things that now we can't do anymore due to industrialization and globalization. We lost contact with our own land, with our own territory. And
I think, yeah.
And it's going to enrich us if we look into that, ourselves in our own ancestry.
Yeah, and recognizing that we have to bring back that relationship between ourselves and land, and between ourselves and others, because just from my own perspective, I've been raised in a very capitalist, individualistic worldview. And it's only recently I've started to actually see that from a different lens and realize the impact that that's had on me. And so it's really about learning not just how you act in your career, but how you interrogate your relationship with all sorts of things. Maybe that's a good way to then connect to your learning journeys, which you have recently published on your website. And can you share for people who are listening what they might be able to get from those learning journeys and other ways they can work with you and learn from you?
Yes, so I've been working in education for the last few years, and as much as there is a lot of work done in the space of specifically applying that work to, let's say, design as a whole, it's still an emerging field. For me, it's been also my personal journey. It'd be very interesting to try to find ways for people to access a lot of that knowledge, and providing avenues for people to explore authors that maybe they did not know about. So Foundations of Responsible Design is the place where I created this small online course that is a starting point that can give you enough resources for you to start exploring all of these ideas. And I can support people with, coaching and trying to guide them in this journey, because everybody's journey is different. But also I realized that a lot of the education offering out there is made in cohort, which are very powerful, but sometimes can become a little bit expensive for people that want to explore this direction. So for me, it's been also a way to try to make this as accessible as possible.
Yeah, actually practicing what you preach, which I love. For me, that's like one of the key takeaways of this, that if we identify we have certain values, and if we identify that there's ways that we can actually have power over certain things and give away power, which is even more important, then that's what we should be doing. We should be aligning our values with how we act and show up in every day.
And that's not just a moral question, but it's really like a well-being question, because I can tell you that when you do align with yourself and with your own values, it's just going to feel really good.
Yeah, thank you as well. As I mentioned before, I did coaching with you, and it was a really great way of starting to identify, well, how can I show up more aligned with my values in my consulting? Cecilia, you're such a wealth of knowledge, and I would recommend anyone listening, if you are interested in some of these topics, to please reach out to her, undergo coaching, sign up to the learning journeys. And thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you. I also want to say that the process of coaching you is also very inspiring for me as well. It's always like a two-way journey for everything. So thank you for your openness and for the opportunity to talk with more people today.
Yeah, thank you so much.